Also colleagues online, I would guess. Yes, this is being web streamed, so also welcome to those that might be joining online. We are obviously very glad to host you all here and for hopefully a very interesting afternoon of work together on the regulation of digital work, the digital in labor, platform work, and algorithms. I think we have a very interesting program. There will be basically two panels chaired by two MEPs from Social Affairs, as you know, in particular Elisabetta. She's also our rapporteur for this important file. I'll just address that, but it's great that we can get around together on the matter with researchers, with platform workers, by the way, with incredible experiences. I've had the chance to hear Hermann in other occasions bringing his own experience to us, which was very interesting because for him it was kind of a research but a real life experience. So it's really interesting that we can also have that input. I mean, people from Nicola Schmidt's cabinet will be with us, members of parliament, so it's a very, trade unions, of course, so, I mean, there's a very, I would say, broad number of approaches that will be brought to the table, and I hope that the debate will be lively. I know certainly that this is for us, Socialists and Democrats here in the Parliament, one of the most prominent legislative files in this term. And by the way, Irache, our leader, she apologizes for not being able to be with us here at the beginning, so you are stuck with the Vice President for Social Affairs. But let me tell you that for me it's a huge pleasure because it's one of the biggest challenges in front of us. We as progressives, we are not afraid of digitalization. We should not be afraid of digitalization. By the way, I think we as Europeans should not be afraid of digitalization. We should try to take the lead on digitalization and not always being behind the Americans or the Chinese. But at the same time, it's from our side that European citizens can count with a strong voice towards regulating unfair conditions of work in the platforms, in the digital economy in general. We have been very vocal on the lack of regulation for platform work for years. And we consider, obviously, that the proposals at the table from the European Commission, from Nicola Schmidt, from our Commissioner, are a very good step on the right direction, even if we want to be more demanding, of course, towards the final legislation. Digital labor platforms have become a huge part of our economy. Let's just remember that 28 million people in Europe are working through digital labor platforms. This is very significant. And also important to recall that 9 out of the 10 platforms active in the EU, they currently classify people working with them as self-employed. It is true that many drivers, careers, etc., are autonomous in a correct sense, and they lease their own work vehicle, they decide on when to log in or not. But it is also true that their livelihood is subordinate to a digital platform, which takes a fair share of the transaction revenue and really organizes all their professional life from the moment they are connected, and from then on they are really working for the platform under their authority and with part of the means also being provided by that platform. The pandemic's obviously brought a renewed sense of the society, of the role these platforms can have and will have in our lives for the future. The platform economy is certainly one of the speediest developing parts of our economy, but at the same time, there's a lot going on in terms of workers' rights. And by the way, there's a lot going on in many member states in terms of regulating workers' rights, and that certainly will also be discussed here today. But anyhow, it was important that we took action, that we are taking action from the European side to regulate this at the European level as much as we should. This directive also provides the ground to adequately regulate the usage of the algorithms and the automated systems in what regards the management of labor. And the algorithms are not neutral. It's true for many things, for social media, for digital work, but it's certainly true for the regulation of the work of these citizens. From the moment they are connected, the algorithm as one means, of course, and that means it's not neutral in terms of the relation between the employee and the employer. That's certainly to be said. So we have to ensure that these algorithms work for the best for the people and not the other way around, and that's also an issue within this legislation. So, as I said, many member states have already put forward some experiences. Now we have this very important initiative. And we should also frame all of this in the context of what the citizens demanded from us on the Conference on the Future of Europe. Citizens said clearly, we want a more social Europe. That's what we got from the citizens. And that's, by the way, our main pledge as political family towards an eventual convention or something out of the conference. We want Europe to become more social. That's certainly our priority. And as I normally say, the Porto Summit or the Porto Declaration, this was not kind of a beauty contest in which the leaders were there just to take some nice photos in the Portuguese good weather. It was because we were committing to advance in the social dimension of Europe. And that has to be taken serious by all the leaders from Porto onwards, I would say from Gothenburg onwards, but certainly from Porto onwards, and not as something that just happened is to be forgotten for the future. So, really eager to follow the debate. We'll be with you for as much time as possible from my side, but now it's my time to turn to Elizabeth to chair the first panel, and as I said, welcome you all. It's a pleasure to organize this event from S&D. Elizabeth, the floor is yours. Grazie mille.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Pedro. It is really, I'm very, very happy to be here. So thank you to everyone. I've pushed it. Doesn't work? Pronto? No? Yeah. Okay, okay. So I'll try to speak louder. So thank you really so much to everyone. I'm very happy to open the first panel and also to have as our, key speaker, Pedro Marquez of the S&D Group. I'm very grateful to the S&D Group for having organized this event. As Pedro told you, I think that this directive is really one of the pillars of the legislature, of the entire legislature, together with the directive on minimum wage. And this one, we really have impressed a social turn to, the European Union. And we are very glad on that. Of course, our aim has to be very clear. We want to protect workers and new kind and forms of work, which are exponentially growing all over Europe. And we do not want to come too much late, and we want that workers have what they deserve to have, social rights and social protection. But at the same time, we also want to protect good employers, because there are, of course, good employers, and they have to be absolutely protected as well. What we would like to do with the directive is to, have a legislation, a binding legislation, which can help us to correctly state the employment status of platform workers. So we have seen that we are talking of millions of workers all over Europe. We have many cases of bogus self-employment, as the sentences all over Europe in the courts have demonstrated. And so we think that workers have to be rightly classified. So if the objective conditions of work are those of an employment relationship, it is the right of the workers to have all the social protection connected to an employment relationship. Otherwise, if we are in front of genuine self-employed, it is absolutely okay. The important thing is that the condition of work really demonstrate an objective situation with regard what the workers do. And also I think that together with this aim, we also want to try to, to anticipate the future. That this is very ambitious, but we would like to have a very strong part of the directive on algorithms and algorithms management. We really would like that algorithms, as for the information connected to the professional life of workers, are subject to collective bargaining. We want that workers are informed transparently on, the organization of their work, their career, their upgrading and downgrading, the ranking, the portability. So we really think that digital algorithms will be probably the most important protagonist in the labor market in the next years and decades. And so we have to, how so to say, to fix some minimum requirements and minimum standards. So I do not to lose or to steal too much time. The first panel has mainly a technical focus, so we have asked prestigious experts and researchers coming from academia, and also some representatives of trade unions and employers to speak about, of course, the directive and what they think about our draft report on platform work. So I would immediately give the floor to Valerio De Stefano. Professor De Stefano, I think he's connected, I hope, with us. No. Valerio,
yes, I am.
Okay, Valerio is in Canada. And so, Valerio, you have 8 minutes, more or less, to enlighten us about the directive. I have to say that Valerio De Stefani has already taken part to several meetings within the parliament, also really to study technically the directive. So I'm looking forward to listening to you. You have the floor, Valerio.
Thank you very much, Elisabetta. It's a pleasure to be with you today, even virtually. So I think this
Maybe you can speak a little bit louder. Can you hear it?
Yes. So
yeah.
I think the proposal from the Commission is a welcome initiative, is a welcome step forward in the attempt to regulate platform work, but it still falls short of delivering everything that you have just mentioned in your brief presentation. And I think that the initiative that your group and you in your report have tried to move forward will help strengthening the provisions of the directive in the direction of better working conditions for platform workers. The provisions of the Commission's, the most important ones are the ones concerning employment status on the one hand and the ones concerning algorithmic management on the other. Touching upon employment status, the Commission is proposing to introduce a presumption of employment, as many of you know, that basically would help to the platform workers that feel that they have been misclassified as independent contractors to obtain reclassification as employees. Now, the problem with the proposal of the Commission is that the presumption is only triggered if 2 out of 5 criteria are met, and these criteria are either extremely difficult to meet or they already correspond to something that is so similar and stringent to what a normal employee experiences, so being supervised by someone else, being disciplined by someone else, being monitored by someone else, that it doesn't make sense to say, well, if these elements are present, then there is a rebuttable presumption of employment, and then basically the platform can prove otherwise that you are a self-employed person. I think that the draft report does a very welcome job of basically putting away these extremely narrow criteria and establish a more general presumption, which still is rebuttable. Of course, it's not an absolute presumption. Let's say it's rebuttable, but it's operating more generally. Now, what is the next thing that I think is going to be important? The important thing is also that the directive gives direction to the member states about how this presumption should be rebutted. Otherwise, if you don't limit at the European level the ways in which the presumption can be rebutted, all the national member states will go their own separate way. They will keep on working on the same traditional criteria that apply to in the distinction between employment and self-employment in rebutting the presumption. So basically, you would have a provision, the presumption, that risks being useless at the practical level or have a very low effectiveness at the practical level in the national member states if the member states are not given some instruction or direction as to when to allow the presumption of employment to be rebutted by the platforms or by whoever wants to rebut the presumption. So I think this is going to be extremely important to address. The second thing that I think is extremely relevant is the chapter on algorithmic management. Now, the chapter on algorithmic management will give information rights to individual people. It will give information and consultation rights also to trade unions when algorithmic management systems are in place and monitoring systems are in place, which again is an extremely welcome suggestion from the Commission. I think there are a few things that need to be addressed also there. The first one is only platform workers will be considered employees, would also have the right to have their workers' representatives involved in the information and consultation. This doesn't make much sense, also because in the legal basis of the directive, there's Article 16 of the Treaty of the Functioning of the EU that doesn't distinguish between employees and the self-employed. The most important protection will be the collective ones, and it doesn't make sense to exclude the self-employed from this protection because it's compatible with the legal basis, and the self-employed are organizing in trade unions, and trade unions are ever more interested in bargaining over algorithmic rights. So this is one thing that needs to be addressed. The second thing that needs to be addressed is how to basically complement the different provisions that govern algorithmic management at the European level and also at the national level. And there will be a need to make the Artificial Intelligence Act compatible with what the provisions of the directives say, but also, importantly, there will be the need to extend the provisions of the directive beyond platform work, because algorithmic management is not just limited to platform work. It has extended much broader than that, and I'm sure my colleague and friend, Professor Prussell, will say something about it. So one of the things that is truly breakthrough in the draft report of Elisabetta Gualmini is that it aims at extending the provisions on algorithmic management beyond the scope of platform work to all workers in the European Union. Again, this is entirely compatible with the legal basis of this instrument, and I think it will be the most important initiative that the Parliament could take to bring this home, to basically allow the directive to be extended beyond the platform economy, because algorithmic management goes much beyond that. And with this, I stop. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Valerio, for your suggestions, basically referred to the two main parts of the draft directive and also the draft report, of course, that is the status and the presumption and how to rebut the presumption, and then the second part on algorithms. Now I would give the floor to Professor Jeremias Adam Prussell. He's Professor of Law in the Faculty of Law and Fellow of Magdalene College, University of Oxford. I'm very happy that he's sitting here in presence, in physical presence, and so, and you can take even 10 minutes. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for this kind invitation to join you here today. And thank you also, Valerio, to setting the scene so well. I think when it comes to platform work, it's been really interesting. There's two things going on there. On the one hand, platform work really highlights a lot of existing challenges we've had in labour markets for a long time. And I think false self-employment, and indeed that divide between self-employment and the employed, is one of the fundamental challenges that exists all across the labour market. So when it comes to what Valeria has said, I think these challenges, the status presumption, again, thinking through about applying that to all workers is hugely important. But what platform work has also been very much is a laboratory for the futures of work, and a laboratory for a lot of the kind of technologies, kind of the implications of how work is going to change, not in terms of robots coming for our jobs, all these sort of stories we hear, but actually the fine-grained changes in terms of what's going on in the workplace. And their algorithmic management and the advent is really core to that. And so in terms of the work I've been doing with my team at Oxford, funded also by the European Research Council, which we should gratefully acknowledge, particularly in this setting, is bringing together computer scientists, fundamental rights lawyers, and data protection lawyers to explore what the challenges are. And here is what I think the ultimate yardstick has to be. We first need to work out the extent to which there's a novel phenomenon going on, what is generally new and different here, and then we need to work out what the particular regulatory needs are. Because one thing that we also have to be very careful about, and while we talk about new legislation, and that's really important, we also have to remember there's a lot of existing EU social protection norms already, and we mustn't ignore their role. And so I think it's really, really important that remember that actually when it comes, for example, to algorithmic discrimination, that actually EU social law already protects a lot of different norms. And so making sure they are consistently employed is also very important. But so what's new? What's different? I think there's, broadly speaking, two categories of harms or two categories of problems that we really need to think about. The first one is what we might broadly think of as privacy harms, or the way economists would put it, information asymmetries. Employers have always been collecting information about workers in various forms, but what algorithmic management allows us to do suddenly is to collect information about just about every single aspect of a worker's lives. Constant monitoring and surveillance, detailed collection of extremely granular data and information, everything from my lunch habits, which can be combined with my shopping habits, which can be combined with when I switch on, and even what kind of phone I use to switch on. So that's the first big challenge, and any kind of successful measure needs to help us overcome these information asymmetries. The second big challenge is a loss of agency, a loss of human control and involvement, particularly on the part of management. So many of you who have been involved in this topic might be aware of a lawsuit brought against a major provider of warehousing services in the United States, who were accused of sacking trade unionists. And their defense in that lawsuit in Baltimore was to say, well, local management, the people actually running this warehouse, neither understand nor have any control over the algorithm that actually decides on the termination of workers. And I think fundamentally, and this is also where I think the labour and the management perspective really come together, we need to ensure that we re-establish a sense of agency, a sense of control over what is actually happening in our workplaces. And so therefore, when we look at the norms of the Platform Work Directive, I think those are the two key challenges against which we need to evaluate it. Does it, first of all, help us overcome the information asymmetries in the workplace? And second, does it help us re-establish a sense of agency, both for workers and for management? And whilst time is short, I think it's really important to say that overall the scorecard is really good. I think overall the Platform Work Directive succeeds in overcoming both of those challenges. So when we talk about sort of, changes, amendments, discussions, it's really a question of fine-tuning it. And I think in that sense also, it's important to say that the Platform Work Directive is very different from the AI Act. I think the AI Act, as an overarching omnibus instrument, fails to do a lot of these things. It fails to understand the specificities of the technology, it fails to understand the specificities of the context of employment, and it fails to actually also interact with other norms, both at the domestic level, in terms of different member states, what they're doing, but also actually different parts of the EU regulatory acquis, from data protection through to consumer protection. So baseline is the scorecard is very good. actually the AI Act does not do well. Platform Directive does extremely well in overcoming these challenges. So the 4 proposals I've brought today are really more questions of fine-tuning, more questions of thinking about how we can make an instrument even better that I think already does very well indeed. So if I can go to my next slide, please. The first thing we want to do is think about how we tackle these information asymmetries. Now, in economics, we've got 2 ways of tackling information asymmetries. Either we can ban the collection of certain kinds of information, or we can actually make sure the information is shared around with everyone. And what the Platform Work Directive does is it does a bit of both, right? So it's got certain red lines, but some of those red lines don't go far enough. So one particular red line I would suggest inserting is predicting the exercise of legal rights protected in union law. What do I mean by that? One of the interesting things about artificial intelligence is that data about me cannot just be used about me. Data about me can also be used to predict what people like me might be doing. And so you can end up predicting the behavior of future workers, and current EU law probably doesn't actually protect you against this. So take the example, somebody who really doesn't like trade unions, but the algorithm predicts with a 97% likelihood that they are going to organize and they're going to join a trade union. Now, under existing EU law, they are probably not protected by that because they don't have the protected characteristic, probably not protected by associated discrimination. So actually, it's not just about current workers we need to protect, but also anyone who in future might want to exercise predicted rights. And again, this is not a sci-fi scenario. There are lots of practical examples out there of using these systems, not in the European Union, but certainly in the United States, to predict, for example, which stores are likely to organize or which workers are likely to join a trade union. So when it comes to these red lines, I think it's really important that we don't just focus on existing workers, but also the potential future exercise of rights. If we go to the next slide, a second red line I think that's important to insert is that we are all familiar with Article 22 of the GDPR, this notion of a human in the loop, a ban on fully automated decision-making. But actually, when it comes to limiting the grounds of processing, as the Platform Work Directive does, at the moment, fully automated dismissals would probably not be illegal. Now, there's lots of decisions which you can fully automate. You know, paying me every month is a decision I would have no problem with fully automating. There are other decisions that are so significant in terms of their dignity and their impact that we don't want them to be fully automated. It's also important that we don't make this too big, because once a human has to be involved in every decision, there's lots of empirical evidence that a human just ends up approving what the computer does every time. But so one thing we call for is that when it comes to a decision as important as the termination of the employment relationship, you know, the very core, in a sense, of the employment agreement, that is something that we suggest you should never be allowed to automate. And again, you could amend it quite straightforwardly by simply in Article 6.5 of the directive, just insert the notion that the termination of a relationship is something that you should never be allowed to automate. If we go to the next slide, if we take the second series of concerns we had, that was about the agency and how we make sure that actually humans have a sense of control and agency over what is going on in our workplaces. And there again, the Platform Work Directive goes very far towards what we in our work call the humans above the loop, right? We want sort of human general oversight of the operation of the system. And so what Article 7 of the Platform Work Directive already does is that you set out a series of monitoring, assessing the risks, providing impact assessments, essentially. But crucially, what the Article 7 doesn't do at the moment, it doesn't say what has to happen with those provisions. And so when we think about collective bargaining, when we think about involving various forms of worker voice, we think it's really, really important as a basis for that collective bargaining, as a basis of collective negotiation of the algorithm, those impact assessments, that documentation needs to be made available both to the workforce and to the workers' collective representatives. Because there's no point at all in saying we need to bargain over this, we need to negotiate it, if we don't understand its operation in the first place. So it's really important that we use the provisions we already have in Article 7 to make them available to workers, make them available to workforce representatives. Now, some people might say, okay, we also have concerns about confidentiality, about intellectual property at this point, but there's really good examples already in EU law. So you look at Article 6, for example, of the Information and Consultation of Employees Directive, there are provisions in there that deal with how you would do the confidentiality. So confidentiality is something that we need to take care of, we need to take account of, but actually there are clear illustrations of how to go about doing it in EU law already. And that then brings me to my final point, if we go to the next slide, and that is taking a bit of a step back and thinking about the general scope of the measure and its legal basis. So one thing I think that is actually really neat is the fact that there are multiple legal bases going on here. There's Article 153, of course, which is core for social acquis, but we're also using Article 16, which is the protection of personal data. And what that allows the instrument to do is extend its scope beyond the employed to actually all workers in the platform work context. Now, when it comes to extension, I agree very strongly, and I've argued, for example, also in my book, Humans as a Service, that the platform economy is not separate, is not distinct from the rest of the labour market. It might be the sharpest end of some of these trends, but I think from an overarching perspective, it doesn't make sense to say gig work is completely different from what's going on in the rest of the labour market. So in principle, any suggestion of saying the algorithmic management is a challenge right across the socioeconomic spectrum. It started in the gig economy, but today it no longer matters whether you work in a warehouse, drive for a platform company, work in a university, professional services firm. I'm sure even the European Parliament uses various forms of algorithmic management through things like Microsoft Teams. So I think an expansion of that would be very welcome. In the short term, I think one sort of very concrete suggestion is at the moment there's one particular protection that's hidden in Article 7.2, which is against psychological and physical impacts of algorithmic management. I would recommend actually moving that into Article 6 in order to ensure that that protection is actually available to all workers. Because at the moment, Article 7 is not extended to all workers. So that would be a very concrete way of ensuring that going broadly. But ultimately, in the long run, I think the challenge is whether it's in this instrument or whether indeed it becomes a broader political demand for an instrument for algorithmic management for all workers. I think we need to recognize that, not least as a result of the COVID pandemic, algorithmic management is a challenge for all workers, and it goes very far. Crucially also, and this is where Article 16 becomes interesting, it is not just about personal data. Right? Article 16 is the basis for dealing with personal data rather than all data more generally. What we're interested in the employment context is the exercise of employer function. And that is why ultimately Article 153 always has to be one of the core bases in legal terms in the treaty to ensure that what we're looking at is not just the use of personal data, but really the automation or the augmentation of employer functions. So in summary, two key challenges: massive information asymmetries, a lot of human agency. Overall, Platform Work Directive does really well in tackling these challenges, in overcoming both the privacy harms and the information asymmetries, and in going a long way towards establishing human agency. Much better to approach these issues on a sectoral basis, to focus specifically, as indeed the treaty wants us to do, to use Article 153 as the legal basis for regulating platform work. Very suspicious, very different to use Article 114 as the AI Act does, and indeed where explicitly under Article 114.2 employment is excluded from the scope. What we need is an instrument that understands both the technology and its harms, but also specifically understands what's going on in the workplace. And subject to the amendments I've proposed, I think the Platform Work Directive goes a very long way towards that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And it was Jeremias. It was really very interesting. And in fact, I think that the two challenges that you so brilliantly described are exactly the core of, our legislative attempt. So how much human agency do we need in order, also to direct and to monitor this kind of new world, of new evolution of events in the labor market, and also the huge problem of the asymmetry among the power of collecting information between, of course, the employers and the workers. So, very good. Now I will give the floor to our third guest, and Hermann Lewis. There. Hermann Lewis has a double role, so to say, but he's a platform worker, but also a sociologist and an author. He's a philosophy teacher in Brussels and Antwerp, and he wrote a very interesting book about Homo Delivero. So I'm really looking forward to listening to you. Please, you have the floor, Hermann.
Thank you very much. You didn't tell me how much minutes I got. 10,
Yeah,
12?
Yeah, eight.
I'm from Limburg. I speak very slowly. So I wrote this book in the beautiful Dutch language about working for a well-known platform of Deliveroo. And what I'm trying to grasp in the book is why do a lot of these platform workers call themselves happy slaves? Because it seems to be a paradox. How can you be a slave and be happy? How can you know that at some extent you're being exploited in your job, but not be unhappy about it? And that is because being a platform worker is a choice that you make in an existing labor market. And that, I'm afraid to say, in the context of the low wages, the low-wage labor market, that the low wage is not the main problem for low-wage workers. The main problem is that they're usually forced into part-time contracts, into temporary contracts, a day, a week, 2 months, into flexible hours, flexible tasks, and they have no decision power whatsoever. So at some point, it can become interesting to say, well, if I'm a self-employed rider for Deliveroo, maybe I have to work for 70 or 80 hours a week to get a minimum wage, but at least I can decide for myself to do this 70 or 80 hours. I'm not dependent on anyone else. That's for the happy slaves part. Because I was working in 2020, I also had to think about what it meant to be a key worker or an essential worker during lockdowns. And I can only say that meal delivery has never been essential. It's rubbish. Just like before lockdowns and just like afterwards, I was just bringing fast food to students being too lazy to collect it themselves, or bringing usually healthy food to people working, young people working, that do not want to leave their desk at noon, or that do not want to leave their sofa at night. None of these people would have died if I hadn't provided them with a meal. So it has never been essential. There were different reasons for that. I'm not wanting to speak a lot about that. Maybe for the second slide, very short, it's what I did. It's not an academic work. I call it an ethnographical documentary. It's kind of a joke maybe for people who read Bourdieu. But in the year of 2020, I worked approximately 215, I stayed login time on the slide because I was logged in. And according to Deliveroo, if you're logged in, but you're not working on a meal and delivering it, you're not working because you're not paid when you're waiting. And so I did approximately 750 meal deliveries during the year. The third slide, please.
So, sorry, how many deliveries?
700.
About
Yes,
700.
a month, for instance, a month.
Yeah. So how does a delivery rider work? I always say it's kind of a soumission volontaire. It's, well, soumission is obviously Houellebecq. There's a lot of that kind of jokes in my book. But why a soumission volontaire? It's the paradox of the happy slaves. Because it's voluntary, as I said, it is a choice on an existing labor market. But once you make that choice, it's submission. Because you have no control, no power. All the control, all the power lies within the application that is in your phone, which is the platform. It decides when you get a task. It decides how much you get paid for the task, under what conditions you do the task, and you have no influence whatsoever. After a year of riding, I cannot guess which criteria I have to meet to get a job. To me and not to another rider. I don't know if I'm a good rider or a lousy rider. I have no clue. I cannot negotiate. So it means my autonomy, the word has been has fallen here today. Autonomy is binary. I can either accept or I can reject. But the thing is, I don't know what I'm accepting or rejecting. For instance, I'm in Leuven and I get an order. Leuven is the town where I worked, and it's about 15 miles from here. I get a job and it says I have to go to McDonald's and I have to deliver a meal on St. Antoniusberg, which is, for the cycling fans, the place where Julien Alaphilippe won the UCI World Championships. So it's a little hill. I don't know what I'm signing up for. So I just get the restaurant, the address, and a figure. I know, €4.32. But I don't know at that point what I have to do. If I come at McDonald's and I just have to pick up a McFlurry for a student that's waiting at home craving, picking up a McFlurry is 30 seconds, it weighs 150 grams, and the student is probably craving in his window waiting for me to arrive. I don't know that. It could also be somebody who has just ordered 5 Big Mac meals, for which I have to wait for 20 or 25 minutes in McDonald's. I have to separate the cold and the hot in my backpack. It's a lot heavier than my McFlurry. And when I arrive there, I have to phone up the customer, and he says, oh yeah, sorry, I'm still in a traffic jam on the E40. Can you wait for 10 minutes? So it's the same for you, I will say, €4.32. I don't get negotiation power on saying, if you make me wait for 20 minutes, it costs you, I don't know, I'm not that expensive, €7. I can't. So I don't know what I'm signing up for. And that's what we have spoken about, the last speaker, information rights. You just don't have that information. So when it comes to risk, the risk of being at a restaurant that is closed, it happens. Or a restaurant that makes you wait for 20 minutes. It happens. A customer that's not at the place where he orders his food. Oh, I ordered it at home, but I'm still at work. Can you come to my workplace? It's only 2 miles. The risk is for me. While, and that's the uneven risk spread, in our tradition in Europe, the risk usually lies with the people who are in control, the employers. And here it's the other way around. So it's an uneven risk spread. Maybe you can go to the next slide. So what we do is we ask ourselves the question, should a writer be self-employed or not? And what we do is, and in Belgium, what we really did, because there was a low case, we look at the contract. And I say the contract is a deflection of reality. When I read my contract with Deliveroo, it is not what I do when I'm on my bike. It's some kind of representation. And what do we do to make up if people are self-employed or not? We have criteria. And for the Belgian case, it were 8. Was what the first speaker was talking about. Shouldn't we have like more general presumptions? No, what we have is criteria. What do? They give work to corporate lawyers. Because you make a criterion and they're going to write up the contract to meet the criterion. That's what they do. So we provide a lot of work to corporate lawyers, but it's not really in the interest of writers. And I'm going to give you 2 examples of criteria, so 2 of the 8 criteria that were used. One of them was, why am I self-employed at Deliveroo? It's because Deliveroo does not demand exclusivity from me. They allow me to work for different companies. But why should that make me self-employed? Currently, I work for 3 different schools, and I'm employed. None of them has asked me, so I have 2 schools in Brussels and 1 in Antwerp. None of them say, you should work exclusively for us. So the criterion, I don't know why that criterion is used until I start thinking about what the head of corporate affairs of Deliveroo Belgium told me during an interview, and I have it on tape. And he told me, well, this job was never meant for people to provide for a family as a full-time employment. So why do platforms allow you to work not exclusively for them? Because they know that anyone who's trying, except if he's working for 12, 13, 14 hours per day, he will not get enough money to lead a decent life. And that's why they're all working for Deliveroo plus Uber Eats plus Task List plus Amazon Mechanical Turk and all these platforms. That's why they're combining. And a recent study in Spain, a lot of Spanish people here, one of the main things why people are, writers are happy to be self-employed and to be combining all these platforms is because if one of them fails on them, like Deliveroo is going a bit down in Leuven, if I have not so much work from Deliveroo, I can still work for a different platform. But does that make me self-employed? I don't think so. And the second one is Deliveroo does not give me restrictions on the uniform that I wear while doing the job. It's weird. Because when I signed up with Deliveroo, they made me buy their costume. It's cheap. It was maybe 25 euros, and it's good. It's really good material. If you want to bike in Belgian weather, which means storm, rain, snow, if you want to be visible in traffic, it's really good stuff. Also, the thermo bag is really good stuff to do the job that you're doing. And it's cheap. I couldn't get that somewhere else. Plus, it's easy. I come to a restaurant, I wear the Deliveroo uniform, they recognize me. They're, oh yeah, this guy is probably looking for the fries and I don't know. And they're ready for me. So why would I have an interest in not wearing the uniform? I didn't know until I spoke to a social worker here in Brussels who told me, well, the guys that do not want to work in a Deliveroo outfit are the 15-year-olds, the 16-year-olds that are working illegally for these platforms, that rent or lend from a friend some login to work on, and they don't want to be caught by any labor inspection because they're working illegally. So that's two criteria. When you look at them, I think, but why would that be a criterion to decide if I'm self-employed or not? It's rubbish. Plus, what is the reality behind these criteria? I think that's really important when you draw up legislation, is that you try to think, but what does this mean in reality? And then I'm already at my conclusion. So it's binary, as is the work. One, I think what you have to avoid is to play a cat and mouse game. You write up legislation with criteria, provides work for corporate lawyers, they're going to change the contract, and you can start all over again. So don't make it a cat and mouse game, make it good first time. And then secondly, and maybe more firmly, in this same Spanish study, one of the CEOs of one of the platforms, and I don't know which one, said, if we have to meet, it won't be the person next to me because I know he employs his riders, but they said, if we have to employ the riders that we have, it cannot be profitable in towns smaller than 100,000 people. That's what you already said is true. Well, one, according to economy papers that I read, it has never been profitable to have a platform. It's running on venture capital, on risk capital. So it's not profitable. And secondly, and maybe most firm thing that I want to say, if giving workers decent labor conditions means that a service is not profitable, then maybe that service should not exist in the European Union. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you, Pedro. Thank you so much, Hermann. I think I'm going to buy and read your book, of course. And yeah, I was thinking that I don't know if it would be possible in Italy to work for 3 different schools and be an employee. I don't know. I'm not so sure that would be possible. But in any case, because we have a very rigid, kind of labor market. But your presentation was, of course, very, very interesting. So now we are going to listen to 2 other contributions, which are very important because we shift, so to say, from the technical points of view to a mixed technical and real experience-based point of view, to a representative of a trade union in Spain, Álvaro Vicioso Alfaro, and to an employer, Patrick Bergareje Sainz de los Terreros. Sorry for my pronunciation. I speak English, German, and French, but not Spanish. And we know that in Spain you signed a very interesting and good, I would say, collective agreement between Just Eat and, of course, the representatives of the workers. So we are really very curious about the contents of this agreement, because actually one of the main, so to say, problem or challenge connected to the directive will be the real implementation of the rules of the regulation that we are going to formulate, because we know that we are very good all over Europe in, the policy making and the policy formulation, and not so good as for policy implementation. So we are really looking forward to listen to you. So now I give the floor to Alvaro. Thank you so much for 10 minutes. Thank you.
Bueno, muchas gracias. Buenas tardes a todas y a todos. Lo primero, antes de mi intervención, voy a intentar ser lo más conciso y concreto posible, pero quiero hacer una ronda, como nobleza obliga, de agradecimientos al Grupo Socialista y Demócratas Europeo por la invitación amable que nos han hecho, y agradecer el trabajo de Elisabetta y de tu inmenso grupo que estáis haciendo en estas semanas en una materia que nos afecta y mucho a nosotros en nuestro país, en España y en el territorio de la Unión Europea, por supuesto. También, y por terminar y por concluir, quiero agradecer el trabajo de los interlocutores sociales en todos los países de la Unión Europea. En nuestro caso, a Patrick, que es el interlocutor que viene después de mi intervención, y a empresarios que nosotros llamamos empresarios Castillo, y sindicalistas, compañeros y compañeras sindicalistas Castillo, como en el caso de la Unión General de Trabajadores es el compañero que algunos de nosotros conocemos, que es Rubén Ranz, sin el cual el trabajo de sindicalista Castillo que ha hecho durante muchos años en nuestro país, en España en concreto, no hubiéramos podido llegar, uno, a la ley Rider, a la mal llamada ley Rider, porque no nos gusta el concepto de Rider. Nosotros somos más del término español de repartidor, evidentemente más castizo, si se me permite la expresión, pero la ronda de los agradecimientos es importante porque, más allá de lo que pueda hacer el legislador, si los agentes sociales en los países no encuentran elementos que fructifiquen y que trabajen primero en la sombra y luego en público bajo la luz y los taquígrafos para redactar los acuerdos, no llegamos a estos puntos. Bueno, voy a intentar ser rápido en la intervención. Las plataformas, la economía de plataformas digitales en nuestro país y en Europa, en el territorio de la Unión Europea, está creciendo de una forma brutal. ¿Podéis pasar la segunda pantalla, por favor? Entre 2016 y 2020, los ingresos de las economías de plataformas se han multiplicado prácticamente por 5 en el territorio de la UE, pasando de 3.000 a 14.000 millones de euros aproximadamente. En la actualidad, la realidad es que 28 millones de personas trabajan a través de plataformas digitales y para 2025 se estima que esta cifra alcance los 43 millones. La gran mayoría de estas personas son autónomas realmente. Sin embargo, se calcula que 5,5 millones de personas trabajadoras, un 19,6% del total, están clasificadas de una forma, en nuestra opinión, incorrecta como autónomas, puesto que mantienen una relación laboral, de carácter laboral, por cuenta ajena que se encuentra encubierta, lo que llamamos nosotros en España los falsos autónomos y autónomas. Las plataformas digitales, todos tenemos que crean oportunidades tanto para las empresas como para las personas trabajadoras y para las personas que trabajan por cuenta propia también, y mejoran el acceso a los servicios para los consumidores. Pero, sin embargo, las nuevas formas de trabajo también están planteándonos a todos y a todas en nuestro país nuevos retos, y también en el territorio de la Unión Europea. Cada vez resulta más difícil clasificar correctamente a las personas con respecto a su situación laboral, lo que en algunos casos da lugar a unos derechos laborales y una protección social que no son adecuados, en nuestra opinión. Además, el uso de los algoritmos en las plataformas digitales, esa gran palabra, el algoritmo, está suscitando dudas en materia de responsabilidad y transparencia. Para resolver estas cuestiones y para mejorar todas las condiciones laborales de las personas trabajadoras, evidentemente, como estamos diciendo, la Comisión Europea está proponiendo un conjunto de medidas que voy a pasar lo más rápido posible para no ser reiterativo, una comunicación con medidas relativas al trabajo en plataformas, la propuesta de directiva sobre mejoras de las condiciones laborales, un proyecto de directrices que aclaren la aplicación del derecho de la competencia en el territorio de la Unión Europea, a los convenios colectivos de las personas que trabajan por cuenta propia sin asalariados y que tratan de mejorar sus condiciones laborales. La directiva también propone, y nos parece positivo, pretender garantizar, sobre todo, que a las personas trabajadoras a través de plataformas digitales se les pueda reconocer la situación laboral, importante, que corresponde a su modalidad de trabajo real. Siguiente diapositiva, por favor. Para ello, proporciona una lista de criterios de control para determinar si la plataforma es un empleador. Importante palabra, el empleador o la empleadora. Si la plataforma cumple al menos 2 de estos criterios, se presume desde un punto de vista jurídico que es un empleador. Nosotros, para la Unión General de Trabajadores en España, es muy importante la determinación de que la carga de la prueba del empleador quede muy clara y muy nítida para eliminar de facto y de raíz todas las tipologías que tenemos en el territorio de la Unión Europea de autónomos, de falsos autónomos, más bien dicho. Por tanto, las personas que trabajan a través de la plataforma en cuestión disfrutarían de los derechos laborales y sociales que conlleva la condición de trabajador o trabajadora. Para quienes son reclasificados como trabajadores, esto significaría que tienen derecho a percibir, evidentemente, un salario mínimo, cuando exista, a la negociación colectiva, a la regulación de la jornada laboral, a la protección de la salud, así como el derecho a disfrutar de vacaciones retribuidas, importante, o de un mejor acceso a la protección en caso de accidente de trabajo, a las prestaciones por desempleo, a la prestación por enfermedad y a las pensiones contributivas de jubilación cuando llegue la edad. Las plataformas, en este caso, tendrán derecho a impugnar o refutar esta clasificación, evidentemente, pero deberán demostrar, esta es la carga de la prueba, que existe una relación laboral, que no existe una relación laboral, perdón. Los claros criterios que propone la Comisión Europea, en nuestra opinión, aportarán más seguridad jurídica a las plataformas y reducirán las costas procesales y facilitarán en mucho la planificación de las compañías que sí quieran trabajar en un entorno de competencia leal. Importante ítem, la competencia leal en el territorio de la Unión Europea. Precisamente un estudio de la Confederación Europea de Sindicatos ha evidenciado que 5 de las empresas de plataformas más grandes de Europa, al cumplir al menos 2 de los requisitos que establece la propuesta de directiva, tendrían que convertir a todos sus colaboradores en personas con contrato laboral y con todos los derechos laborales que esto implica. Para la Unión General de Trabajadores, el trabajo de regulación en el mundo de las plataformas es cada vez más urgente debido al crecimiento que están teniendo exponencial en los últimos años. En este sentido, cuando más tiempo estén sin regularizarse estas personas trabajadoras, mayor será la desigualdad que sufran, ya que esta directiva supone una alta en el sistema de cotización de la Seguridad Social de más de 5 millones de personas en todo el territorio de la Unión Europea. La directiva también aumentaría, en nuestra opinión, la transparencia en el uso de los algoritmos, esa gran palabra, por parte de las plataformas digitales, garantizando un seguimiento humano del respeto de las condiciones laborales y dar el derecho a impugnar las decisiones automatizadas cuando sean impugnables. Estos nuevos derechos son novedosos en nuestro país y se concederán tanto a las personas trabajadoras como a las personas autónomas. Y, finalmente, la Comisión aumentará la transparencia en torno a las plataformas, al aclararnos a todos y a todas las obligaciones vigentes de declarar el trabajo a las autoridades nacionales laborales y poder pedirse a las plataformas digitales que pongan a disposición de estas toda la información clave sobre cuáles son sus actividades y sobre las personas que trabajan a través de ellas. Esto es importante porque a día de hoy todavía estamos poniendo luz en ese entorno. Ponemos la siguiente diapositiva, por favor. Bajamos al caso español, presunción de laboralidad de las personas trabajadoras en las plataformas digitales. Tras numerosas sentencias y ni más ni menos que la acción sindical y la negociación colectiva, que no es otro trabajo del que conocemos en los sindicatos en la Unión Europea, tuvimos muchas sentencias judiciales que daban la razón a los trabajadores y resoluciones de la Inspección de Trabajo y de Seguridad Social en España que establecían claramente la laboralidad de las personas trabajadoras en las plataformas de reparto en grandes empresas multinacionales. Se llegó el Real Decreto Ley 9/2021 de 11 de mayo que trasladaba la Ley 12/2021 de 28 de septiembre, por la que se modificó el texto refundido de la Ley del Estatuto de los Trabajadores, que es la norma laboral básica de nuestro país, para garantizar los derechos laborales de las personas dedicadas al reparto en el ámbito de plataformas digitales. En concreto, esta disposición adicional 23ª del Estatuto estableció la presunción de laboralidad de la actividad de las personas que prestaran servicio retribuido consistente en el reparto o distribución de cualquier producto de consumo o mercancía por parte de empleadora que ejerce la facultad empresarial de organización, dirección y control de forma directa, indirecta o implícita mediante la gestión algorítmica del servicio o de las condiciones de trabajo a través de una plataforma digital. La reacción es nítida y clara. Ahora hay que interpretarla y pelearla porque no todos los agentes que operan en nuestro país están cumpliendo la legislación a día de hoy y ahora pasaremos más adelante a intervenir sobre esto. Desde la Secretaría de Acción Sindical que yo llevo en la Federación de Servicios Privados de la UGT, elaboramos una guía de consulta hace un año que se titulaba Rider, las cosas claras, la Unión General de Trabajadores y Trabajadores no te engaña, donde estamos informando desde entonces en un formato muy visual y ágil de diseño de las cuales son las principales notas de laboralidad de la ley Rider, así como de los elementos esenciales que todo repartidor de una plataforma digital en nuestro país ha de conocer para poder saber cómo defender claramente los derechos laborales que le corresponden. Es urgente y muy importante que las personas trabajadoras en nuestro país, en España, conozcan, tal y como establece la ley, que estas plataformas digitales deben de laboralizar inmediatamente a todos y todas sus repartidores. Esto quiere decir que las personas trabajadoras deben tener voz y voto en estos procesos y estar convenientemente representados por sus agentes legalmente que les representen. Para lograrlo, en UGT hemos movilizado la estructura en un porcentaje muy importante para generar afiliación en este colectivo de trabajadores que son precarios, afiliación y posteriormente establecer los procesos para generar una corriente de representantes legales de los trabajadores en todas estas tipologías de empresas. Las plataformas de reparto, después de aplicar la ley Rider, tuvieron 3 meses, hasta el 12 de agosto de 2021, para establecer una relación laboral con sus repartidoras y repartidores, poniendo fin a la práctica de los falsos autónomos, transformándolos a todos en personas trabajadoras asalariadas. Y no todas estaban, ni no todas las empresas han estado por la labor de adoptar estos cambios. De hecho, a día de hoy todavía muchas empresas siguen incumpliendo la ley. La Unión General de Trabajadoras y Trabajadores presentó el 23 de abril del año pasado ante la Dirección General de la Inspección de Trabajo y Seguridad Social. Perdón, se me ha ido. 3 denuncias contra Globo en concreto, Uber Eats y Amazon por externalizar la actividad utilizando empresas pantalla, en nuestra opinión, para aplicar convenios colectivos más baratos. El objeto de la denuncia que hemos interpuesto desde la UGT es la denuncia de la subcontratación abusiva que se está realizando en estas empresas para aplicar el convenio de empresas de mensajería, que además son de eficacia limitada, y para que estas plataformas sigan teniendo un margen empresarial suficientemente amplio y que sus cuentas de resultados les den los números que ellos estiman necesarios. En el caso de Uber Eats, tan solo se han contratado un número muy pequeño de repartidores y repartidoras a través de sus contratas después de desconectar masivamente a más de 3.000 personas trabajadoras de la plataforma. Esto motivó que tanto la UGT como Comisiones Obreras hayamos presentado una denuncia ante la Audiencia Nacional contra la empresa por un despido colectivo de carácter encubierto. Por su parte, la empresa Deliveroo en España decidió hace unos meses cesar su actividad en nuestro país y abandonar el territorio, dejando a más de 3.000 personas trabajadoras en un limbo legal. Tras conversar con toda nuestra afiliación en esta empresa, que iba creciendo, y en vista de las dificultades en el proceso de constitución de una mesa de negociación del expediente de despido colectivo tan brutal, en la UGT decidimos, pensando en el beneficio de todas estas personas que se encontraban en un limbo, participar en la negociación de despido colectivo, negociando el mismo conforme a la condición de sindicato más representativo que tenemos en nuestro país. Alcanzamos un acuerdo que reconoce la laboralidad de todos estos trabajadores y trabajadoras despedidos y recoger unas indemnizaciones en torno a los 45 días por año de servicio, con una cuantía mínima de indemnización de 1.000 euros en caso de no alcanzar este importe mediante la antigüedad del salario. Pasamos la diapositiva, por favor. Otro tipo de plataformas digitales de trabajo. Si bien es cierto que en nuestro país ha avanzado en los términos que establece la propuesta directiva europea con la laboralización de las personas trabajadoras, solo se ha establecido para las plataformas de reparto, por lo que quedaría, en nuestra opinión, pendiente la equiparación de derechos laborales para las trabajadoras y trabajadores de todo el resto de plataformas digitales, porque las plataformas digitales, todos y todas tenemos claro que no son exclusivamente de reparto. Y es que los problemas de falsos autónomos de las plataformas digitales no se acaban con la regularización de los repartidores y las repartidoras, sino que este tipo de organización del trabajo debe de extender sus tentáculos, extiende sus tentáculos sobre todo tipo de sectores, y muchos de ellos forman parte de actividades de la Federación de Servicios Privados, a la que yo represento en este acto. Por ejemplo, a título enunciativo, en el sector del comercio y de los grandes almacenes tenemos plataformas de ventas de productos, plataformas de ventas de productos de segunda mano, de venta de vehículos. En el sector de comunicaciones y de la cultura tenemos plataformas de redes sociales y plataformas de todo tipo de juegos. En el sector de carácter financiero tenemos las denominadas fintech, las denominadas WellTech, dedicadas a la gestión de patrimonio personal, las denominadas RegTech, que resuelven problemas de regulación financiera. En el sector de la hostelería tenemos plataformas digitales de restauración social, de guías turísticos que trabajan a través únicamente de propinas, es el único tipo de ingreso que tienen. En el sector de la limpieza tenemos plataformas de cuidados donde se contrata a la persona bajo el régimen de empleado del hogar o se le exige ser exclusivamente autónomo. Tenemos plataformas de limpieza a domicilio. En el sector de las oficinas y de las aseguradoras tenemos plataformas de búsqueda de empleo, tenemos plataformas de búsqueda de empleo especializada en el sector de la hostelería, el turismo es muy importante en nuestro país, tenemos las Insurtech especializadas en contratar seguros o agentes de mediación de seguros, tenemos plataformas digitales de servicios jurídicos, también como falsos autónomos, de administración de inmuebles. En el sector de los transportes esto ya es mucho más amplio el territorio. Tenemos plataformas de transporte de viajeros, de transportes de mercancías, plataformas digitales de alquiler de vehículos, plataformas digitales de alquiler de patines y bicicletas eléctricas y las superconocidas plataformas de reparto de mercancías, evidentemente. Por ello, desde la UGT, la Unión General de Trabajadoras y Trabajadores, estamos apostando por extender de forma urgente y necesaria el modelo de regulación seguido con las personas trabajadoras en el reparto de mercancías al resto de sectores que también ejercen las facultades empresariales de organización, dirección y control de forma directa, indirecta o implícita mediante la gestión algorítmica del servicio de las condiciones de trabajo a través de una plataforma digital. Pasamos a la siguiente diapositiva, por favor. Negociación colectiva en nuestro país, en concreto en nuestra Federación de los Servicios Privados, como os decía a todos y a todas. Dentro de las orientaciones para la negociación colectiva de nuestro sindicato tenemos claro varios objetivos, y voy terminando. Ampliar o concretar el ámbito funcional y personal de los convenios colectivos sectoriales para garantizar su aplicación a los trabajadores y trabajadoras de las plataformas digitales, como hicimos en el 5º acuerdo laboral del ámbito estatal del sector de la hostelería, importante sector del turismo en nuestro país, incorporando en el ámbito funcional la actividad del reparto de comidas y bebidas, incluidas las realizadas desde plataformas digitales. Cuando esto no sea posible, abriremos ámbitos de negociación nuevos, como estamos haciendo en el caso de, recientemente, el convenio sectorial de distribución urbana de mercancías. Se está negociando, se está iniciando, está en los inicios, un convenio sectorial novedoso que aglutinaría las actividades de mensajería, entrega domiciliaria y plataformas digitales de reparto que no requieran de una habilitación administrativa previa de transporte de mercancías. Luego, negociando también, por otra parte, el convenio de vehículos de transporte con conductor, las famosas VTC que llamamos en España, que si bien ya contamos con un convenio colectivo sectorial de ámbito autonómico para Madrid y con un convenio colectivo de empresa en el ámbito de la comunidad autónoma de la ciudad de Bilbao, nuestra federación, nuestro sindicato están negociando un convenio sectorial estatal para que uniforme y ahorme todas las condiciones laborales y salariales de los conductores de transporte de vehículo con conductor con plataformas digitales. Y luego vamos, para ir concretando, vamos al primer convenio colectivo de una empresa de reparto de mercancías. Nuestro sindicato decidió, junto con otro sindicato, Comisiones Obreras, atender a la llamada de la plataforma digital, no las plataformas digitales, porque muchas no las hay, por desgracia.
1 minute.
Yes,
Okay.
thank you. Atendimos la llamada de las plataformas digitales que sí asumieron la nueva normativa y nos sentamos a negociar por primera vez un convenio colectivo con una plataforma digital de reparto de comida a domicilio, Just Eat, que representa a Patrick, mi siguiente interviniente, entrando a negociar laboralmente una actividad totalmente desregulada. Con la firma de este acuerdo hemos generado todos, tanto empresa como agentes sociales, un gran acuerdo y un esfuerzo para regular las relaciones laborales de las personas trabajadoras de Just Eat y, fundamentalmente, para dignificar el trabajo de los repartidores, como, por ejemplo, la referencia a un convenio sectorial de actividad, garantías de seguridad y salud en el trabajo, ordenación del tiempo de trabajo, contratación indefinida, coberturas de accidentes laborales, derecho a retribución digna, derecho a principios de igualdad de trato y oportunidades en el trabajo, protección en materia de seguridad y salud, cumplimiento de la normativa en materia de protección de datos, regulación del trabajo a distancia y garantía de ejercicio vital para nosotros y nosotras de los derechos sindicales de negociación colectiva. Este convenio se ha convertido en un perfil, en un puntal para apuntar elementos particulares de la economía de plataformas, que cuenta con patrones de comportamiento en el ámbito de las relaciones laborales que difieren de los negocios tradicionales. La negociación de este convenio, en nuestra opinión, demuestra que más allá de la ley Rider hay mucho trabajo por hacer en la negociación colectiva en el sector de las plataformas digitales en nuestro país. Terminamos con la siguiente pantalla, ya termino, Elisabetta. Queremos reforzar la afiliación y representación entre las personas trabajadoras de las plataformas digitales. Es vital. Tenemos que potenciar la prevención de riesgos laborales en estas plataformas de repartidores. Hay que tener en cuenta que la ley Rider ha reconocido el derecho a la información de la representación de las personas trabajadoras y también al análisis de los algoritmos. Para terminar, desde la Unión General de Trabajadores y Trabajadoras queremos lanzar un mensaje a todos los presentes aquí. La ley Rider en nuestro país, el legislador ha hecho un buen trabajo, pero no es la solución que el legislador legisle si luego los agentes sociales, y tanto los agentes sociales entendiendo como las empresas que quieren aplicar la legislación y que deben de aplicarla y no deben de escurrirse a la aplicación de la legislación, si no hacen ese trabajo, si no se consigue representación, si no se consigue afiliación y se establece, como cualquier otro sector productivo de nuestro país, un entorno de diálogo social donde se regule sectorialmente y se dé garantía jurídica tanto a las personas trabajadoras, laboralmente hablando, y a los empresarios que libremente deciden cumplir con la legislación e invertir en nuestro país, no habremos conseguido nada. Muchas gracias y perdona, Elisabetta.
Grazie, grazie, grazie Alvaro. Sorry, and now now it is the turn of Patrick, General Director of Just Eat. We are very, very happy that you are here, and really we are happy to know that there are employers who really cares, of course, about their workers. And so please take the floor for 8-10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Elisabetta. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for having me. So today I'd like to speak about three things. First, I'd like to introduce the company that I lead in Spain called Just Eat. Second, I'd like to share with you what the rider law that Alvaro was describing has meant to our business and to our sector, because I think it is surely a first step and a precedent for the European directive. I think it's a law that we can look into as we look into building European legislation. And thirdly, and not less important, we want to make an ask to the European legislators, because we believe that for us to be able to do the right thing as employers, we actually need the legislators to help us. Because we see more and more cases across the world and across Europe of companies trying to do the right thing, and they end up not being able to do it because actually it does require a certain level of investment that is additional to that of their competitors, and that ends up sort of eroding the whole principles of the companies. So from that perspective, that is the reason why the directive of the European Union that we've been discussing is really, really critical, because not only it is important for the employees, but it's also very important for the employers. So starting by Just Eat. Just Eat is the food delivery leader in Spain. We are part of a very large group based out of Amsterdam. We operate in 20 markets. We're listed in the London and Amsterdam Stock Exchange. And in Spain in particular, we serve about 3 million customers. We've got 30,000 restaurant partners that work with us. And all this work, we do it through our over 1,500 workers, 1,000 of which are actually couriers. Full employed couriers with full rights and that are actually on our payroll. And we do this because we believe that our business needs to be sustained on sustainable elements. And that sustainability, we understand it in three different axes. The first one is the labor sustainability, because we believe that if you treat the employers right, employers will actually do a better job, and it will be good for them, and it will be good for the company. Second, we believe in sustainability in the environmental perspective, and because we are very conscious that our activity can have negative impact in the environments where we operate. And thirdly, we want to make sure that we're also sustainable from a financial standpoint, because businesses, if they don't turn a profit, they die. Now, if we turn into Spain, what really happened when we were starting to apply all these strategies was that we realized that there was a very big vacuum from a legislative standpoint, and that actually we were trying to do things that cost much more than what other operators were doing in the market. When the rider law started to be discussed, in Spain, we decided to defend it. And we defended it for four reasons. The first one was a technical reason. So we already had 2 cases of the Supreme Court in Spain that had established that the relationship between couriers and the employers was that of an employment relationship. Number 2 is because we needed a legal certainty to continue to be able to do our business in a equal level playing field for all operators. Number 3 is because we believe that a sector of future, as it's the platform companies that will employ increasingly more people, and as you were saying, it's already 24 million employees, but there will be, or workers, sorry, but there will be more in the future. We cannot accept the words that Hermann was sharing with us, and we need to dignify the job that these workers in platform economy do. Lastly, this law was the result of the social dialogue. Platforms were fully embedded into the process. We did this through the business associations. The government was obviously very involved, and naturally the unions, and Alvaro and his team were actually present there. So we defended the rider law, and the way we participate in this rider law was twofold. The first one is we explained that there is a path where platform delivery companies can have their couriers as employees. And for whatever reason, there had been implanted a certain debate in Spain whereby you need to have independent contractors in your payroll or on your company, or else you'll never be sustainable. Well, actually, if we look around what's happening today with delivery companies, I can assure you that there's very few companies that have been able to turn a profit, and actually 90% of them do use independent contractors. So I can guarantee you that the labor status is not the justification for an unsustainable financial path. As a matter of fact, in Spain, Just Eat in 2019 was a profitable company, and we had employed couriers. How we implemented the law, actually, it didn't have much effect on us because we're already employing our couriers. In Spain, there was a bit of a vacuum, as I said, and so what we decided to do as an employer was we didn't want to go through a painful court and judicialized process, so we actually took on all these employees on our payroll. But when the courier law came into effect, we realized that, as Alvaro was saying earlier, it wasn't sufficient. And while I think that the legislator did a good role in setting the boundaries and setting the main principles, how you actually take that into effect as an employer with your employees, it's a complete different ballgame. So from that perspective, what we had to do is embark ourselves into a collective bargaining agreement negotiation, which we did successfully after 18 months of negotiation with the 2 leading unions. And this has led us to have the first collective bargaining agreement in the history of food delivery companies, I believe in Europe, certainly in Spain, but one of the very first ones in Europe. And we did this on 4 key pillars. The first one is our predictability and digital disconnection. So couriers have the right to disconnect from the digital devices. We wanted to establish a living wage, so minimum salary for all couriers, equal conditions, no secrets. Third, secure employment practices with a guarantee that we will be contributing to social security. And number 4, an algorithmic transparency, because we actually don't think that if you explain to an employee what the rules of the algorithm are, we don't think that is necessarily in breach of your own intellectual property. As a matter of fact, I actually would struggle to be able to tell an employee whether he has done a good job or bad job if I cannot explain to this employee how we're actually measuring the performance of his work. So from that perspective, we've been through and through saying that it makes absolute sense that employees within food delivery, at least platforms where we have employees, they need to have access to understanding what these algorithms are all about. Now, I will finish by saying why I think the European directive is so critical. And it is very critical for 3 main reasons. The first one is that we already have 24 million employees in Europe, workers in Europe, that are working for these platforms. Now, this number is only going to go higher. We are now at a pivotal moment where we can really define how the work in these digital platforms should happen and how we can dignify the work that people like Hermann was telling us can really do the work in sort of in a context where they are protected. Number 2 is that platform workers, I don't think should be secondary class workers. I think it's a job like any other, and for that reason, they deserve an equal treatment as any other workers would do. And actually, we do require the legal certainty not only for the employees but also for the employers. Lastly, we need to clarify the level playing field for the operators. We cannot accept, I think, that those employers that want to do the right thing cannot do it because that implies a significant additional cost in their P&L vis-a-vis that of their competitors. So from that perspective, we do require the legislator to help employers to do the right thing for the employees. Otherwise, we're left alone. And I can tell you at least 4 examples that are happening in Europe where we are doing the right thing, we're treating our couriers the way we should, and yet that is costing us so much money that we cannot sustain a competitive position. So from that perspective, my ask to you is that you really help us, help the employers to be able to do the right thing, and I really hope that the European Union, as an institution that has been for many, many years defending that good balance between business progress and social protection, really takes a stake in this debate and takes the directive into effect. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Really. Thank you, Patrick. Thank you so much. You were also very inspiring, so really the right motivation to go ahead. So now we have more or less 10 minutes for some questions by you. So if anyone has any question to ask to our, contributors, speakers, so we are glad to collect some questions. Is there anyone from the academic side or trade union or general management and also the experience of a sociologist and a worker, a platform worker? No questions? Sorry? Yes? No. Okay. 1, 2. Okay. We begin with the lady. Okay. Very, very well. I'm sorry I don't read your name, so please, you have the floor. Thank you. If you present yourself. Okay.
Yes, my name is Mark Bula. I'm a group advisor for the Greens, working also on the platform directive. My question is to the representative from Just Eat. We hear sometimes from platform companies that classification as employee impacts the flexibility which is needed for platforms in order to be able to deliver the services that they do. So you have advocated for legislation to create a level playing field. Maybe you could comment on this issue as well. I think our perspective is that it is possible to strike a balance, but I would like to hear your views about this. Thank you.
Sorry, thank you for the question. So I would separate it in the following way. The legislative action creates the right level playing field for all operators to work under the same cost structure, let's call it like that. Then it's really up to the company through social dialogue with the unions, in this case, to really make sure that that law can be properly implemented in the business. So to answer your question, the way to make sure that even with an employment condition, you can have the necessary flexibility, and I'll speak about flexibility in a second, what you do need is to create a collective bargaining agreement that can allow your couriers to work under the flexibility that is required, not only for the worker, but also for the employer. The way we've done it, for example, in Spain, is that there is not necessarily a maximum level of hours that they need to work on a weekly basis. They can accept jobs within a relatively short period of time, and ultimately they are also free to take on other jobs. So we've got many, many workers within our staff that, Monday through Friday, they are students, and then Saturday and Sunday they work for us. We're contributing to Social Security. They're able to reconcile, several dynamics within their life, and I think it's perfectly compatible. I think that the word flexibility has been really used in a one-dimensional way to really defend that independent contractor is the only way to reassure that flexibility. I assure you this is not the case. There are cases, but it really has to be done through collective bargaining agreement where you can create the right balance between flexibility but also predictability, because couriers, as Hermann was saying, also need to be able to predict how much money they're going to make, and they need to be able to plan for their lives and understand how much money they're going to be making. So I think that the employment structure that the law gives you is only the baseline, and then you need to build on those rules of engagement with the collective, through the collective bargaining agreement.
Very well, thank you. So very quickly, the second question okay, and then we start with the second panel because we know that some speakers have some time problems. So the second question was, yeah, please.
1 second. Hi. I think I have a question for the same person. It's partly already answered, but how are these people employed? Are they paid hourly or have they a contract per a weekly contract? And the second question would be, when you entered the market in Spain, were you the first food delivery company, or were there already established other companies and you had to fight for the market? Because I can imagine it's harder if there are like other companies already there who uses other practices. It's more difficult.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question. I'll start with the second one. So Just Eat is the food delivery leader in Spain, and we're also the incumbent. So we were the pioneers in the market. But it is important to say that we enter into the logistics game much later than our competitors. So let me explain this to you. We used to be a marketplace operator whereby the couriers were actually employees of the restaurants. When we started seeing competitors coming into the market with a very sort of fluid, let's call it like that, independent contractor model that was putting couriers on the street, we decided that we had to start employing our own couriers because otherwise we wouldn't be able to access some supply, some restaurants that wouldn't have their own couriers. So from that perspective, while we were the first ones to be in the market in 2010, we were ironically the latest to jump in the logistics space. And what was clear for us is that the only way in Spain to stay out of the courts, even before the rider law, was to have a model where you would be employing the couriers. And ironically, what happened is that even though we were the only company that was not in the courts, we were also the company that was spending most money in making sure we're compliant with the law. So that hopefully addresses your second question. In terms of the first question, so our couriers have an indefinite contract, is the legal term that you've got in Spain. This means that basically there's no expiration date on those contracts. So you sign a contract. Typically they've got somewhere around 20 hours of hours per week, and we have set the hourly pay per the CBA. So that is strictly clear how much are they going to be making, and that affects at the national level. Thank you.
Very well. So thank you so much. We are perfect on time. Of course, I would have had many questions, but now it is the time to start with panel number 2. So I give the floor to my colleague, Alex Saliba, and we just exchange the places. But really, thank you so much for having taken part to this first panel. And of course, we will stay in touch because the negotiations is starting basically next week. So we are really at the very beginning of the whole process. Thank you to everyone. Thank you so much. Okay.
So we can start now with the second panel discussion. We have an amazing speakers list also for this second panel, starting from Dennis Radke, who is a member of the European Parliament and also the coordinator of EPP in the Ample Committee, Anna Carla Pereira, who is a member in the cabinet of our commissioner, Nicolas Schmidt, the commissioner responsible for jobs and also social rights, Maxime Cerruti, who is joining us online, who is the director of Business Europe Social Affairs Department, and last but not least, Ludovic Voe, who is the Confederal Secretary of the ETUC. Basically, the aims of this panel is to collect all the views of different participants about how to ensure that the directive, when it will ultimately be adopted, will be effective and will reach our ultimate goals, the goals that we are aiming to, goals such as the correct classification of platform workers, which ultimately would not be totally reliant on core jurisprudence which, although giving us some interpretation with regards to reclassification in the past, has also created a lot of confusion when it comes to classification of these platform workers and also the apps per se. The issue of promoting fair competition in the platform sector by harmonizing, first of all, the rules in the sector, and especially ending the spread of bogus self-employment, which ultimately I believe is one of the primary aims of why we are here today. The fair management when it comes to algorithms, giving more transparency to how these systems are working and regulating this working space, and also affecting the fundamental rights of platform workers. And we are stressing here on worker participations. Basically, these are the main topics that I would like also to have in this discussion today. Speakers are not going to be given specific questions, but they will be open to make introductory remarks for 6 minutes. Then we will be having another extra 2 minutes for each speaker to also interact and also reply to comments and remarks done by other speakers. So we're going to start with MEP Dennis Radke to make his introductory remarks.
Yeah, thank you very much. I want to use the opportunity and speak in German, so who is not capable to understand, and I see there are a lot, but I'm asking myself, why is an Austrian colleague putting its earphones on? Ja, also, dass wir jetzt die Österreicher schon die Deutschen übersetzen müssen, ist auch eine Neuerfahrung, aber ich mache ja mit euch immer gerne neue Erfahrungen. Ich möchte mich erstmal ganz herzlich bedanken für die freundliche Einladung von Elisabetta zu diesem Event. Ich möchte mich auch ganz herzlich bedanken für das schöne Werbegeschenk hier. Ludovic sagte gerade, damit darfst du dich aber nicht sehen lassen. Und da habe ich gesagt, das Gegenteil ist der Fall. Weil bei mir in der Fraktion gibt es ja den einen oder anderen, der glaubt, ich sei hier viel besser aufgehoben. Und also ich bezweifle das, dass ich hier viel besser aufgehoben wäre, aber ich werde mir natürlich den Spaß nicht verkneifen können, mit dieser Flasche demnächst hier auf den Fluren spazieren zu gehen. Und so, jetzt aber zum Eigentlichen, warum ich ja auch hier eingeladen bin. Ich freue mich wirklich sehr, jetzt auch gemeinsam mit Elisabetta und mit anderen Kolleginnen und Kollegen an diesem wichtigen Dossier zu arbeiten. Du hast darauf hingewiesen, ich bin Koordinator der EVP im Ausschuss für Beschäftigung und soziale Angelegenheiten. Und ich finde, dieser Ausschuss hat natürlich über Jahre vielleicht so ein gewisses Schattendasein geführt, weil natürlich legislative Schwerpunkte hier im Hause in anderen Ausschüssen zu Hause sind. Das ist klar, das wird auch so bleiben. Aber ich finde, wir haben da gerade auch in dieser Legislaturperiode ordentlich aufgeholt. So, ich sehe hier 2 Leute, die beim Thema europäischer Mindestlohn ganz kräftig mitgeholfen haben. Das war, glaube ich, eine sehr wichtige Wegmarke, die wir genommen haben. Und das ist jetzt die nächste Wegmarke, das Thema Plattformarbeit. Und ich habe vorhin noch zu Elisabetta gesagt, wenn wir bei diesem Thema, und da bin ich sehr optimistisch, in dieser Legislaturperiode zu einem guten Ergebnis kommen, dann können wir wirklich mit Fug und Recht auch sagen, wir haben beim Thema soziales Europa nicht einen Schritt nach vorne gemacht, sondern gleich mehrere riesige Schritte nach vorne gemacht. Und damit will ich jetzt auch einsteigen. Nach meinem Verständnis der Zustand in der Plattformökonomie an vielen Stellen in der Europäischen Union schlicht und ergreifend eine himmelschreiende Ungerechtigkeit ist. So, und da geht es für mich nicht darum zu sagen, Plattformökonomie ist per se gut oder per se schlecht. Sie findet statt. Wirtschaft verändert sich, Arbeit verändert sich und es ist nicht die Aufgabe von Politik zu bewerten, ist das gut oder ist das schlecht, was da stattfindet. Diese Dinge finden ja statt. Aber es ist Aufgabe von Politik, dafür zu sorgen, dass sich nicht rechtsfreie Räume entwickeln. Und man muss schlicht und ergreifend feststellen, dass sich in Teilen der Plattformökonomie wir uns in rechtsfreien Räumen bewegen. Und ich sage ganz klar, diese Richtlinie muss nach meinem Verständnis zwei Dinge erfüllen. Sie muss auf der einen Seite sicherstellen, dass diejenigen, die sozialen Schutz und Zugang zu Sozialversicherungen brauchen, die den auch endlich gewährt bekommen. Und auf der anderen Seite, dass aber diejenigen, die tatsächlich selbstständig sind und es auch bleiben wollen. Wir reden ja hier auch teilweise von sehr hochqualifizierten Selbstständigen, Softwareentwicklern, Ingenieuren, Beratern und so weiter. Die brauchen unsere Hilfe nicht, sondern für die ist es gut so, wie es ist und für die soll es bitteschön auch so bleiben. Aber für die anderen, und das sage ich mal auch ganz klar, das prominenteste Beispiel ist sicherlich immer Uber, da müssen sich die Verhältnisse ändern. Im Sinne der Menschen, aber auch im Sinne von fairen Wettbewerb. Denn Wettbewerb muss nach meinem Verständnis stattfinden über Frage von Qualität, über Frage von Innovation und nicht über die Frage, wer verwehrt seinen Beschäftigten am geschicktesten den Zugang zu sozialem Mindestschutz, zu Mindestlöhnen etc. pp. Und wenn dann Leute zu mir sagen, ja, aber da gefährdest du ganze Geschäftsmodelle mit, dann muss ich ganz ehrlich sagen, kann ich nur sagen, das ist nicht mein Problem. Also ein Geschäftsmodell, das nur funktioniert, indem sozusagen das unternehmerische Risiko einseitig auf Beschäftigte in Form von Scheinselbstständigkeit abgewälzt wird. Das sind doch keine Geschäftsmodelle, wo ich sage, da gebe ich ja als Abgeordneter meinen Namen dafür her und für die mache ich meinen Rücken gerade. Sondern ich bin für andere hier ins Parlament gewählt worden. Ich glaube, dass das, was jetzt auf dem Tisch liegt, auch als Vorschlag von Elisabetta, dass das, was wir im letzten Jahr als Initiativbericht hier mit großer Mehrheit durchs Parlament gebracht haben, dass das eine gute Arbeitsgrundlage dafür ist, in den nächsten Wochen da auch die Ergebnisse zu produzieren, die eine gute Grundlage für den Trilog bilden und die uns auch wirklich einen Schritt weiterbringen. Und sicherlich, es wird einige Detailfragen geben. Ich sage mal Stichwort Rebuttable Presumption. Sicherlich eine der Schlüsselfragen. Wie wird diese Rebuttable Presumption, wie wird die ausgelöst? Das wird sicherlich eine der ganz zentralen Fragen sein. Vielleicht auch eine der Fragen, wo wir am meisten Streit drüber haben werden, weil das sind natürlich auch sehr technische Fragen, hochjuristische Fragen. Aber ich bin sicher, auch mit dem, was ich von anderen Fraktionen schon an Änderungsanträgen gesehen habe, dass wir da zu guten, tragfähigen Lösungen kommen werden. Aber nochmal, die Botschaft ist für mich klar, wir müssen endlich dafür Sorge tragen, dass die, die den Schutz brauchen, den Schutz auch bekommen und diejenigen, die den Schutz nicht brauchen, dass sich für die Dinge auch nicht ändern. Und wir müssen es am Ende so klarstellen, dass wir auf der einen Seite, denke ich, Zugang zu Gerichten klar machen. Dafür ist auch das Thema Beweislastumkehr ganz zentral. Da will ich auch ausdrücklich der Kommission für danken, dass sie diesen Punkt aus dem Initiativbericht des Parlaments mit aufgenommen hat. Ich glaube, es war einer der wichtigsten Punkte, die wir hier letztes Jahr über die Rampe gebracht haben. Und zum anderen muss aber auch klar sein, ich will nicht, dass Arbeitsschutzbehörden am Ende einseitig für irgendwas zuständig sind. Weil ich sage das auch mal mit Blick auf mein Heimatland, auf Deutschland. Also wenn wir hier zu einer politischen Lösung kommen würden, die da heißt Labor Inspection ist zuständig dafür, das alles zu überprüfen. Da muss ich ganz ehrlich sagen, dann hätten wir hier ein Ergebnis produziert, mit dem ich nicht zufrieden wäre. Und wo ich auch sage, es würde an vielen Stellen in der Sache nicht weiterhelfen. Wenn ich mir alleine ansehe, wie löchrig in Deutschland die Kontrollen bei der Einhaltung des Mindestlohns sind, würde mir das keine ruhigen Nächte bescheren, wenn wir sozusagen das einseitig beim Thema Arbeitsschutz und Kontrolle platzieren würden. Also von daher, da müssen wir uns ein bisschen breiter aufstellen. Aber auch da habe ich den Eindruck, da sind wir sozusagen on the same page, wie man Neudeutsch sagt. Ja, so viel von meiner Seite zum Einstieg. Freue mich auf die Debatte heute mit euch und natürlich auf die gemeinsame politische Arbeit in den nächsten Wochen. Dankeschön.
Thanks a lot, Dennis. Now, Anna Carla, Dennis has mentioned the importance of finding this balance between those who are comfortable with being self-employed and having this level of flexibility, but at the same time, the importance of fighting bogus self-employment. How are we achieving, and will we achieve ultimately this final result with this proposal?
Yes, thank you very much for inviting the commissioner, who unfortunately cannot be here himself, and asked me to replace him. Can you hear now better? Yes, thank you. No, I was just thanking the invitation on behalf of Commissioner Schmidt, who would certainly be happy to be here if his schedule would allow him. And before answering your direct question, I would like to certainly underline some of the elements that have already been said, but certainly express that they are also behind the intentions of the Commission's when making this proposal. It has been said that this is an area where the EU can be at the front and spearhead, and we do think that our proposal in many ways is in that front line and opening new horizons for the debate. And we see how international partners are coming to the EU to see exactly what we have put on that text and how the co-legislators are now going to deal with it. It has also been said, and certainly concur, that this is a pivotal moment because we know that we have around, as has been said, 28 million people working in platforms, and this is just going to grow extensively. Now, out of this 28 million, we have estimated that 5.5 million of these workers are vulnerable self-employed and are potentially misclassified in their employment status. It has been said that, this is probably une soumission volontaire. The previous speaker spoke about this. And I would say that soumission volontaire exists every time there is a wave of precariousness into the labor market. And the difference between the past waves of precariousness filtering into the labor market with this one is that now we have technology somehow concealing it, because the use of the algorithm is very much, in a way, concealing the existence of an employment relationship, and we use technology in a way to justify that complexity cannot be solved by merely a clarity of the employment status. So this is a big difference compared to other changes in the labor market that in some ways have reinforced this soumission volontaire that the previous speaker spoke about. One thing I would like to mention in terms of the scope of our initiative, and that has not yet been mentioned, is that we are looking into digital labor platforms on location, but also online. We talked a lot about riders, but this is not just about riders, it's also about online workers that we not necessarily see. I think the case of the rider is politically appealing because everyone sees the rider on the street, but there are many people working behind the screens that we actually don't identify. And altogether, we are then talking about 28 million people, not just in food delivery, but in the care sector, in tourism. So it's actually expanding. And this is for us just a tip of the iceberg or a window of what the future of the labor markets will be. And this is the reason why we felt this initiative is in many ways a signal from Europe, or we want it to be a signal from Europe that introducing technology should not be an excuse for a race to the bottom, and that together with digitalization we can certainly secure high social standards and strengthen the social standards that exist in the EU. The other important point I would like to mention, and that is already mentioned before, is this notion of level playing field. Because it is important that the use of technology is not an excuse to override the system in terms of payment to social contributions and taxes, for example. And this level playing field needs to be ensured not only between different platforms, as was the case here mentioned, but also between platforms and brick and mortar businesses that are also doing the same kind of activity, but not necessarily performing it through a digital labor platform. So all these reasons made us put forward these proposals for a directive. Now, there are two important elements in the directive, but I would like to mention a third one that was just alluded to very briefly. So the first one is definitely the rebuttable presumption, and that has been mentioned. We certainly have looked with great care and attention to what has been proposed in the Parliament's resolution last September, and our proposal follows that path. Now, to us, once the directive will be transposed, and I'm trying to come to your question, the presumption will lay a rule that will apply to all digital labor platforms. And this then means that the labor platforms will have to adapt their practices accordingly. And it also means that those who fall, according to our proposal, under the 2 of the 5 criteria, who fall under the presumption, then they will have to fulfill their obligation as employers. Now, this means that member states, in our view, need to transpose the presumption into their national law. And it also means that all digital labor platforms would have to comply, like any other company, with the new rules, the new legal framework. We have heard quite clearly and with attention that this transposition and this implementation might create doubts and problems, and we are certainly happy to follow the work of the co-legislators and the Parliament to see how certain doubts can be dispelled and ironed out through the amendments that are being discussed. Now, one important thing I think it's also to be recalled is that the Commission's proposal underlines the primacy effects above all, and not only the contractual conditions. So it is really about the facts that one needs to look at, and the factual indicators of what we call a control relationship. On algorithm, I think we have already listened to very interesting suggestions for improvement, and I was very happy to hear that our proposal is perceived as scoring very high on some of the conditions for the directive to be effective. I would like to mention maybe a couple of elements. Aside the issue of transparency that we seem to all be comfortable with, the proposal of the Commission also introduces elements of human monitoring, so there must always be a human supervision in the system and a human review, so that if things don't go in the right path if the machine takes a decision that in a way puts in danger the working rights and the social protection rights, then there is the possibility of having a review of that decision and that the human can intervene in that process. And of course, also an element of redress. And what we also introduce in this directive is the idea that workers' representatives need to be informed of the introduction of the algorithm and the changes in the algorithm, and need to be consulted in those changes. And we think that this goes very much along the lines with the idea that collective bargaining and the presence of social dialogue at the workplace is essential for the directive to be fully implemented. One final point is about what Mr. Alfaro mentioned, the need to declare platform work. This we don't talk so much, but it's also in the directive, and we really believe it's really important because a lot of the work that is happening today through digital label platforms is not declared at all. And so how can you then implement and enforce rules if you don't know that the work is actually being performed out there? And in that process, in that exercise, then there is also, of course, the issue of the cross-border dimension. How do you ensure that this declaration of platform work is respected when we are looking into platforms that work across borders? So these are three pillars of the directive that we think are important. And we have heard through all the debates today, but also previously, that there might be things that can be improved. Some will say in one direction, some will say in another direction. But I think from the debate we heard here today and also from previous conversations, we understand that the Parliament and the Commission's intentions and goals are very similar, and that there is really an intention here to make sure that the workers' rights are protected through this directive. So I certainly think there are conditions to reach an agreement soon under this mandate that will make us all very, very proud and in a way make a step forward in this area. If you allow me, just one final point, because there was a lot of comments about should the provisions of this directive be only related to digital label platforms? Should we go broader? And I think I can certainly speak here on behalf of the Commissioner, but also on behalf of the Commission services, that there is an acknowledgement, obviously, on our side that algorithms are not an exclusivity of digital label platforms. Algorithms exist in other working places and other working scenarios. We also feel, however, that the work of the area of the use of artificial intelligence in the workplace was not, in its broader sense, was not sufficiently analyzed from our side. And so we take your interest in opening the scope of this directive to broader remits as a political signal that certainly we are happy to hear, and that will encourage us to do more work in this area, maybe for a follow-up initiative. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Anna Carla, for your introductory remarks and also for the raison d'etre why the Commission has come up with this proposal. I am sure that both the intention of the Commission and also the intention of the European Parliament is to continue to strengthen the fundamental rights of workers in this regard, and to also do away with the uncertainties that there exist today when it comes to platform workers. But now I want to give also the floor online, this time to Maxime Cerruti, who has joined us online, who is the Director of Business Europe Social Affairs Department, so that he can also give us his thoughts with regards to platform work and the direction that the proposal of the Commission is taking, also with regards to the work and input of the European Parliament. So, Maxime, the floor is yours now.
Dear Chair and ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be with you. I thank you for inviting us, Business Europe, to participate in today's discussions. Of course, we are following with great interest the activities in the European Parliament, and you probably have seen already the main views that we have on the proposal the Commission published at the end of last year. But I'd like to be making a few comments of a general nature to start with, and then to go into a few specific points. And for the comments of a general nature, I'd like to come back to the discussions around the motive, what is behind the underlying objective of this proposal. When you look at situation of platform work, it is obvious that we have different background contextual information that are important. First, it is clear that there were situations of misclassifications, and that we recognize on the side of the business community that of course has created some litigation, and the courts have been involved in providing clarity on these situations. And of course, this is something that legitimately is something that we discuss both on a national level and at the European level in terms of improving the situation, providing more clarity. And of course, there is the element which was very much in the discussions here about what is the employment status, and to what extent the people that are currently classified as self-employed are really self-employed. But having said so, I think it's very important to recognize as well that the Commission's approach to the file was very much in one direction. First, it was considered to be a social proposal that was based on the legal basis in the treaty accordingly. Whereas, of course, if the issue that is really at stake is situations of bogus self-employment, the main response should primarily be about clarifying what are genuine self-employment relationships in the context of platform work. And this is completely absent from the proposal we could see from the Commission. But the European Court of Justice has already looked into that, and there is jurisprudence that sets a number of criteria that relates to self-employment, and that can be indicative of where there is a genuine self-employment relationship. In the Yodel case, notably, for example, the use of subcontractors, for example, the possibility to accept or not accept the tasks that are offered, for example, the possibility to work with different companies and competitors of the one that is in question. For example, as well, the possibility to fix working hours. So these are important criteria that were there to identify what is a genuine self-employment relationship in the context of what is relevant here for the platform work debate. But this was not taken up. And so, of course, we understand that on the basis of the treaty social provisions, it was not possible to address that because it's getting into the single market treaty provision. But there was a possibility to come forward with a European directive that would be aiming to provide clarity for both, so for the employment relationships and for the self-employment relationships in the context of platform work. And this was not done, and we regret it. We think it would be a much better approach to European policymaking in a directive at European level to address both situations, keeping in mind that we had a long debate on transparent and predictable working conditions directive, where it was clear that in any case, the European Union law should not define what is employment and self-employment, but it can be the case that some indicative criteria for both would help on a national level to develop the legislative frameworks that provide clarity in a particular national context, and also having in mind diverse industrial relations practices. And I want to also say that in the first part of my intervention on the general observations. I mean, the other thing that is missing, of course, is the fact that member states have addressed this issue very differently. So we have some member states that were more going into the direction of a rebuttable presumption of employment. like Spain, but there are countries that have been doing very differently. For example, in Greece, much more relating to the Yodel case that I just mentioned and this kind of criteria. And also in France, as another example of a country that was more looking into improving the working conditions for the platform workers, but keeping in mind the self-employment nature of the relationship. On our side, we think it's not for the EU to choose this. It's better addressed on the level of the platforms with their employees. And what is, of course, very important is that there is clarity and that when there is situations of misclassification, some action can be taken to correct the situation. And that was the intention of the Article 3 in the proposal, which I think is rather a good way of approaching the issue. But then, having said this, I think there are 4 specific points that I would like to address today with you, and hopefully having a good exchange also with the other panelists on some of these issues. The first one is relating to definitions. I mean, already the definition in the Commission's proposal of digital labor platform was very broad. And the European Parliament's report is even going broader. This is a concern on our side because we feel like there is one very important aspect of platform work that is missed in those definitions. And this is the triangular nature of the relationship between the digital labor platform, the client, and the platform worker. And that is, of course, a very important aspect of the nature of platform work. So we would really encourage all of you to take this in the further drafting and the further work in the European Parliament. And of course, it is important as well that there is a good reflection of the realities of the workplace in many member states when being on the European level, looking into these issues. So what I was saying on the diverse approaches, I think needs also to be reflected there. But the second point is relating to the overall orientation of the initiative. I mean, the Commission, even though, as you understood, we think it was not a balanced approach to the issue. On the other hand, I think that there was some balanced wordings in terms of fostering the development of the platform economy and ensuring that there are some safeguards basically for the situations of misclassification. But on the other hand, the European Parliament has removed a lot of what was the positive wordings on the development of this part of the economy. And that is, of course, a pity because then it gives the impression that it is really trying as an institution to ignore this practice that has taken a dimension and that will be in the future probably growing, as I could hear in the first part of the debate. I think this is acknowledged by some of you. And I think the point is not to bar the development of the platform economy. It's rather to make it work and to ensure that the rules that exist are respected and that the actors that need to respect them are fully aware of the rules. When it comes to the third point I want to highlight today, it is relating to social dialogue. I mean, I think this directive should be leaving much more space for social dialogue solutions. It was mentioned, I think, by the speaker in the previous panel, Just Eat, that there are already practices of collective bargaining that relate to the platform workers. And that, I think, is, of course, very important. That is going to be fostered and that the directive would recognize not only when it comes to algorithms, but more broadly also in terms of defining what is platform work and the different types of relationships that may exist and how they are used in a particular company. And of course, also having in mind diverse industrial relations practices. This can be done, of course, through a mix of different levels of social dialogue and arriving at the end to have the good clarity and ensuring that people are at the right place and being in good working conditions. Because of course, this is an objective that we all support. And we also recognize the parallel debate on improving the situation of the self-employed in terms of the competition law. But here, indeed, a stronger focus would be needed on the social dialogue dimension. And the last point is on the algorithmic transparency. I think it was covered by some of you. I mean, to put it in a very clear way, we have the impression that this proposal is used to gold plate what is existing in the main legislative frameworks that are relevant to algorithmic transparency. I mean, I can give an example, for example, with GDPR, Article 22, where there are possibilities for digital platforms to collect and process personal data based on legitimate interest and consent. When the proposal for a directive here speaks about no personal data concerning platform workers can be processed unless it is intrinsically connected and strictly necessary for the performance of the contract. So this is very different types of wording and much more restrictive. And of course, we have also concerns in terms of the administrative burdens that these provisions that are specific here in the directive create on the platforms. And of course, when it comes to having risk and impact assessments, providing reasons for decisions in writing, and having at the same time some trained staff to ensure human oversight, I mean, there is probably an underestimation of what would be the consequences for the companies that need to go through that. And of course, this connects as well with the broadening by the European Parliament to not only cover the automated decisions, but also semi-automated decisions, which even accentuates this. So, well, yeah, we would really prefer if the solutions would be coherent and applicable across the board in view of the GDPR and AI-related legislation. But to conclude, we are in the middle of this process. I hope that there can be some good progress. Of course, we have in mind, in view of the diversity of national situations, that the Council also has a very important role to bring forward the views of the member states that have chosen different ways of addressing this issue. And you, of course, can count on us to participate in the debates with you in the European Parliament and in the Council to try to get to the best possible balanced outcome that would be providing for the development of the platform economy and to ensure good working conditions for platform workers. Thank you very much for your attention.
Maxime Cerutti, thanks a lot also for joining us today and also sharing Business Europe's views and point of view. And last but not least, now I want to give the floor to the Confederal Secretary of ETUC, Ludovic Voet. We all know that ETUC has been vouching a lot for a number of years now, but especially during these last 2 years, during the pandemic, to have more clarity when it comes to platform work and the protection of platform workers. So the floor is yours, Ludovic.
Thank you, and I will also use the opportunity to speak in my language, in French, so if you need interpretation, take the 2 seconds that you have now. Je pense que, donc merci pour l'invitation, et donc ce qui est important dans la discussion sur la directive, c'est que pour nous, c'est clair qu'elle part des bonnes intentions. Elle choisit, elle a les bons objectifs, elle choisit les outils que nous on poussait aussi dans la consultation des partenaires sociaux l'année passée, donc c'est la présomption de salariat et l'inversion de la charge de la preuve que le Parlement européen a également plébiscité en septembre 2021. Donc c'est les outils politiques qu'on pense utiles pour régler la question de la mauvaise classification et des erreurs de classification dans l'économie de plateforme, qui est un phénomène qui est quand même reconnu et qui n'est pas un épiphénomène, parce que si on parlait de 1000 personnes qui sont peut-être en risque d'être mal qualifiées, alors on pourrait se dire qu'on peut renvoyer à des guidance et à des conseils aux États membres de comment s'en occuper, etc. Mais ici, on a la reconnaissance qu'il y a potentiellement 5 millions de personnes qui sont déniées de leurs droits. Donc on est en fait face à une situation dont on doit avoir des outils forts entre les mains pour pouvoir répondre à cette question-là. On ne peut pas juste se dire qu'on va leur envoyer un mail aux plateformes et leur dire vous êtes en train de vous tromper. On a besoin d'un outil politique fort. Et donc on a besoin d'une directive, ce qui est ce qui a été choisi. Il est souvent dit, du coup, du côté des employeurs, qu'il y a des approches différentes qui ont été prises selon les pays. Mais ce qui est justement une des forces de la directive, c'est qu'on part de la primauté des faits. La primauté des faits. Donc, c'est-à-dire que s'il y a une relation de travail, s'il y a une relation de subordination, alors il doit avoir un contrat de travail. S'il n'y a pas de relation de subordination, alors le travailleur peut rester un prestataire indépendant. Ce n'est pas un problème. Mais on ne peut pas labelliser en tant que convention de travail indépendant, une relation de subordination. La réalité des faits prime. Et donc là-dedans, c'est important de dire aussi aux États membres qui ont choisi de nier la primauté des faits, que non, ça n'ira pas de nier la primauté des faits. La jurisprudence française, elle est claire. La jurisprudence française avec Uber et Deliveroo, elle est très claire. Il y a subordination. Le gouvernement français a choisi de nier cette jurisprudence claire. Donc, est-ce qu'on peut juste dire qu'il y a des différences nationales d'approche? Non, il y a la primauté des faits. Quand il y a la primauté des faits, on l'applique, et c'est pour ça qu'on a besoin d'une directive. Ce qui, du coup, est, selon nous, à améliorer dans la directive telle qu'elle est proposée. Donc, il y a les bons outils sur la table, mais il y a différents points qui risquent de rendre ces bonnes intentions des actions en fait vaines à la fin, parce que donc ces 5 millions de travailleurs, la question c'est est-ce qu'ils vont devenir, par quels moyens vont-ils devenir salariés? Et donc là c'est utile d'avoir un chiffre comme 5,5 millions sur 28 millions, mais je pense que c'est un chiffre qu'on doit prendre avec précaution, parce que ça peut être, en fait, selon nous, dans pas mal de plateformes, quand on regarde les listes des plateformes, et on a vu les listes de plateformes qui existent en Espagne, montrées par notre collègue espagnol, quand on regarde ces plateformes-là, nous, on n'a pas l'impression qu'il y a seulement 20% de ces plateformes qui subordonneraient leurs travailleurs. Et donc, je veux dire, avoir ce chiffre de 5 millions est utile, mais c'est quelque chose qui est d'office en évolution. C'est parce qu'au plus les plateformes vont se développer, au plus elles vont tendre à l'organisation du travail. Et donc, au plus, la subordination des travailleurs, si on n'a pas les outils politiques adéquats, au plus, la subordination des travailleurs va être un choix entrepreneurial des plateformes d'essayer de rester artificiellement des intermédiaires, mais d'organiser le travail. Et c'est logique parce qu'au plus l'algorithme va se développer, au plus il y aura de clients d'un côté, au plus il y aura de travailleurs de l'autre, au plus ce sera profitable d'organiser le travail. Et donc, mettre en place des règles aujourd'hui, c'est aussi protéger les vrais travailleurs indépendants. Donc partons du présupposé qu'il n'y a que 5 millions de travailleurs qui sont en risque de mauvaise classification aujourd'hui et 23 qui sont réellement indépendants. Eh ben, moi, je pense que quand même, la directive, elle va aussi aider les 23 millions d'indépendants à le rester. Parce que la discussion qu'il y a derrière, c'est est-ce que ces travailleurs indépendants aujourd'hui vont être subordonnés ou pas? Et là, ça rentre dans la discussion sur les critères de la directive. Les discussions sur les critères de la directive, avoir 2 critères pour lancer la présomption ou 3 selon des amendements posés par certains groupes au Parlement européen, ça veut dire qu'on accepte de restreindre la liberté entrepreneuriale des indépendants sur 1 ou 2 critères. Donc si on dit que c'est 3 critères avant de lancer la présomption, ça veut dire que 2 critères de la liberté entrepreneuriale des indépendants les plateformes sont en droit de les restreindre et la directive ne permet pas à ces travailleurs de se défendre de la subordination. Donc ça veut dire, et on sait bien selon le lobbying des plateformes, qu'est-ce que ça va vouloir dire ces critères? Ça va être le droit de fixer les prix et de les fixer sans laisser la liberté aux travailleurs de choisir ses prix. Ça va être aussi l'imposition de standards. Et donc on ne peut pas, dans cette directive, laisser le droit aux plateformes de restreindre la liberté entrepreneuriale des travailleurs indépendants. De l'autre côté, il faut aussi, donc il faut protéger ces travailleurs indépendants de devenir des subordonnés, mais il faut aussi donner la solution pour que les travailleurs reconnus comme subordonnés, et donc sous contrôle des travailleurs, arrivent à ce contrat de travail. Et donc là, on ne peut pas dépendre, et nous, c'est pour nous une des faiblesses pour le moment de la directive qui peut être améliorée, on ne peut pas dépendre que les travailleurs aillent en contentieux contre les plateformes. Premièrement, on l'a déjà fait pendant des années. Je veux dire, Uber, Deliveroo, aux Pays-Bas, ça fait 5 ans que c'est clair qu'il y a de la subordination. On est 5 ans plus tard, il ne se passe toujours rien. Donc la question n'est pas de prouver selon la définition nationale qu'il y a subordination, la question c'est comment on fait appliquer ces décisions. Et c'est pour ça qu'on a besoin d'une loi. Et là, la loi espagnole, elle montre que la clarté juridique de la jurisprudence n'était pas suffisante, il y avait besoin d'une loi. C'est pour ça qu'on a besoin de la directive pour aller plus loin, parce que la clarté, elle est là. Et dès lors, on ne peut ni dépendre du travailleur, parce qu'il n'y a pas 5 millions de travailleurs qui ont 10 000 € de frais d'avocat à mettre sur la table pour gagner 1 000 € de peut-être l'argent qu'ils ont perdu en quelques mois, donc ils ne vont pas faire ça. Et on ne peut pas non plus dépendre des inspections du travail, comme ça a pu être dit par Denis Radke. Les inspections du travail auront très difficile à contrôler des plateformes. Et encore plus, autant les plateformes comme Deliveroo et Uber sont connues, autant les nouvelles plateformes qui vont arriver, et c'est tout à fait normal qu'il y en ait qui se développent, on n'a pas de problème à ce qu'il y ait des plateformes qui se développent. Je veux dire, le lendemain de la création d'une entreprise de plateforme, quand elle va venir s'enregistrer dans les États, ni moi, ni aucun inspecteur du travail ne sera en compétence de pouvoir dire, sans regarder dans l'algorithme, comment est-ce qu'il y a subordination ou pas. Et donc, c'est pour ça qu'on a besoin de renverser la charge de la preuve, mais même aller plus loin, de demander aux plateformes de réfuter la présomption, s'ils le veulent, c'est la Rebuttable Presumption, donc réfuter la présomption, mais que cette présomption, elle soit automatique aux plateformes. Ça ne veut pas dire qu'il y aura, parce que ça c'est une des craintes aussi de certains groupes, ça ne veut pas dire qu'il y aura reclassification automatique. Donc le rapport du Parlement disait qu'il ne fallait pas qu'il y ait de reclassification automatique. Ce n'est pas parce qu'on retire les critères qu'il y a reclassification automatique. Il n'y aura reclassification que pour les plateformes qui ne seront pas en capacité de prouver qu'elles ne travaillent pas avec des indépendants. Et donc, c'est ça, on doit demander à ceux qui sont en capacité de prouver les choses, les plateformes, d'avoir cette charge-là, et même la charge de lancer la procédure. Donc, on ne peut pas dépendre des travailleurs et des inspections du travail pour faire ça. Ça, je dirais que c'est nos points principaux. Là, je trouve que en partie dans ces discussions, et c'était intéressant d'avoir justement l'exemple espagnol. L'exemple espagnol, il montre que face à une jurisprudence claire, face à une volonté politique, également les organisations d'employeurs ont pris leurs responsabilités. Et ça, on a besoin de le voir aussi au niveau européen. Il y a un problème, il faut le régler, prenons nos responsabilités et proposons quelque chose qui va mener à justement ce que les travailleurs puissent avoir leurs droits. Et pour finir, je pense qu'à partir du moment où ces travailleurs seront aussi dans leurs droits sociaux et donc employés, tous les avancées aussi en matière de droit du travail, comme celle sur le salaire minimum récemment, mais aussi d'autres qui pourraient venir, où nous, par exemple, on aimerait qu'il y ait une initiative sur 0 mort au travail, eh ben, pour les travailleurs, pour les livreurs, ça va aussi vouloir dire qu'ils ne seront pas obligés d'accepter des tâches à 3 €, parce qu'ils auront le salaire minimum, et ils ne seront pas obligés d'accepter des tâches à la pression d'avoir 3 € à chaque fois sur chaque tâche, et qui mènent à un taux d'accident énorme dans ces secteurs, des morts assez récurremment dans les différents pays. Et donc, il y a des obligations en termes de santé et de sécurité à donner aux employeurs par rapport à ça, et des obligations de respect des droits sociaux par rapport à ça. Et ça, on peut l'améliorer dans le processus législatif en cours. Merci.
Bravo.
Thanks a lot, Ludovic. Unfortunately, we don't have time enough for giving all the panelists another 2 minutes for making other remarks, because interpretation is going to stop. So I'm going to give the floor to our rapporteur to make her concluding remarks. Elisabetta,
thank you, Alex, so much. Thank you for being here, and thank really to everyone. So we know that our translators have to go away rightly, and so we will be, I just take 5 minutes to draw some conclusions. It was really a very intense afternoon, so I'm very happy to have listened to all the different points of view, so from the platforms, from trade unions, from workers themselves, and also from researchers and policymakers, of course. First of all, let me thank the European Commission. Today we have Anna Clara, because really it was very important for us as members of the European Parliament to have a legislative instrument. So we do have a legislative instrument, and so it is exactly what we asked in our INI report, approved by, it has to be said, a wide majority, of political groups. So we are very happy of that. Of course, there are different points of view. There are technical problems. We have also the challenge, concerning the implementation of the legal presumption, but we will deal on all those issues, and I think that we will be able to reach really a very important goal, to the benefits of our workers, platform workers, and also to the benefit of employers. So I just want to underline really 2 or 3 points very, very briefly. The idea that we are talking of real jobs. So we are talking of real work, not voluntarism, not hobbies. So this is real jobs, real work, and so we have to grant, a right social protection to these workers. We do not have to be obsessed with on-location workers, because maybe we already know the world of riders. We know them, we see them every day in our streets, but we are facing the challenge of a much wider, labor market and a much wider category of workers, so online workers, for instance, and so on and so forth. And so we really have to have a large view on, I would say, all the world concerning platform workers. And of course, we will try to address as best as we can the legal presumption of an employment relationship, the idea also to fix maybe some criteria to rebut the legal presumption and to demonstrate that the workers are eventually genuine self-employed. We will have to address very precisely the problem of the asymmetry of information. So we know from the book of Sushana Zuboff, the surveillance capitalism, the idea that, of course, there is a strong unbalance, of power in getting information between employers and workers. And we will have to assure that algorithms become an object of social dialogue, of collective bargaining, as far as the professional life of workers is concerned. So we will do our best, and I think that if we will be able to have a good directive, as I hope we will be able to, we really will have joined an ambitious goal of the entire legislature. I think that this legislature is mainly focused on the new Green Deal and the social Europe. We have a strong green social alliance as for the policies of the European Union. So it will be a sort of a revolution that we are working on, and I hope that we will do it all together. So thanks a lot, and see you soon, and keep in touch, of course, for the negotiations. Thank you. Thank you.